Now, children across Zimbabwe undertake many forms of farm and domestic tasks, and learning to work is considered a normal part of growing up. But at what point does this constitute child labor? The distinction can often be blurry. That is why the government is considering crafting a localized definition of child labor and conducting a detailed standalone survey to take stock of children working in harmful environments.
Child labor has got a number of indicators, which are more than the indicators that are generally asked for adult employee. So we had noted as a country that there was a clustering in terms of questions that would then be specific for the children. So in order to separate and the sensitivity of the child labor, we as a country we are now trying to separate so that at the end of the day we have more questions for the child, so that at the end of the day we can get as much information as possible, which is a very critical in managing the issue, which is a very critical issue at the moment.
The ministry has engaged with several development partners to sensitize on the ills of child labor and to conduct inspections countrywide to ensure that children are protected from harmful labor practices.
As stakeholders on this global issue, the child labor, we are working flat out with organizations that have been singled out and try to see whether if anything is happening. And we've been doing quite a number of campaigns throughout the country to sensitize on the ills of child labor. And we have also set one of our conditions to our labor officials to go around, the both formal and informal sector to inspect and see whether there is a issue of child labor. And also we are not working alone. We are also working with the development partners in this exercise, so that at the end of the day we will come up with a proper and good report.
Issues of child labor are very complex, especially in an African context, because you'll see, for example, a lot of factors come into play. For example, we mentioned that it could come across as teaching children to work and to be able to fend for themselves as they grow older. It could be helping children out of poverty. There's so many facets that come to play when you consider what child labor is. A very common example among us is the aspect of kutora hama kumusha mumunza mudoroba kuti aende kuchikoro. And a lot of the times they end up then performing a lot of the tasks at home, especially if it's a girl child. She's now the one who is cleaning the house afterwards. She's doing this, she's doing all the errands. And it's part of a normal function of an African household that the girl child is going to be doing all these tasks. But you'll find the level at which now it's more, has this work been done versus have you done your work at school, is what then now starts to tip those scales differently. Or even taking a young girl from the rural areas solely for the purpose of coming to work because their family can't afford to send her to school, or they need the money to take care of themselves. That in itself is also constituting as child labor, because these are children who are under a certain age, who are coming to do work that really they shouldn't be doing. So when you look at it from that aspect, you look around you and you'll see there's actually quite a couple of instances you're like, oh, wait a minute. We actually are straddling the line when it comes to ensuring our children are protected from child labor.
Actually, quite interesting that you have widened the net and have factored in that element at a household perspective, because more often than not when you hear child labor you think of how it's being done at corporates or maybe businesses without necessarily looking into how it affects even the households in the, across the country. And also you look at even how some maids, younger girls are taken from the marginalized parts of the country and they are employed as maids, 15, 16-year-olds. That would also constitute labor. Interesting that you put it across that way.
Like I said, the dynamic is very broad when you look at it in an African context.
Okay.
I think the more industrialized side of things applies to, you'll mostly find it in developing countries. That's where it becomes, that clear cut. When it comes to the African dynamic, there's so many factors that come into play that also come in with that question of, okay, but culturally you'll find kuti mskana achamuka achabika achatsvairamba achadi take care of the family, take care of siblings if you have them, and it's normal, it's part of who we are, it's ingrained in us, but it does shift. Mukomana will then go outside onotsvaira onodi kana vari kumusha achatanga ambonofudza mombe or whatever it is the situation is, but these still come down to the bottom line that it is still child labor. You are taking time away from this child who should be using that time to further their education, to progress themselves, in order for them to actually become an upstanding citizen and to ultimately benefit that family that is raising them at the end of the day. Because if you are less focused on the things that are supposed to develop you and you're more focused on taking care of the things that are not your responsibility, it is not the girl child's responsibility to take care of her siblings.
That's true.
She can help, she can chip in, but it is not her core responsibility. Those are not her children. It is not the boy's responsibility to make sure the garden is tended to. He can help, he can chip in, but it is not his core responsibility. So when we look at the age group and we look at the responsibilities assigned, we do have to bear in mind that after a certain level of responsibility assignment, it is now labor. Well, it is now labor.
Quite interesting, and also to look at it from the other side, where you mentioned the importance and the element of the income gaps that some of the families would be subjected to. You move on to some of the parts of the country where you have tea estates. In Manicaland, you'll still find child labor taking place. Here in Zimbabwe, where you have 12, 13-year-olds who, after coming back from school, they have to pass through a tea or a coffee plantation, to help make ends meet. So I also think that the other element that has to be factored in addressing child labor would be the income gaps that some of the families would have in the marginalized areas. And I think the element of corporate social responsibility, where business entities that are profiteering from this market and other markets should look into ensuring that the labor that is incorporated into the products that they then sell out to the markets is has that element of looking out against child labor.
One of the other things that makes it extremely abhorrent is the fact that you look at I like that you're raising the income gap issue. You'll find that children are definitely extremely underpaid. And it's simply because they are young, they are children, their minds are not at that point where they are in a position to be negotiating for what their actual input is in terms of a salary remuneration. And as a result, you'll find that even though they've been taken out to kind of help the families, bridge certain gaps in terms of what they come back with financially, they are still coming back with way less than the labor they've put in deserves. That's number one. Number two, vanika kujairirwa, vana vadiki. No, true. Just do this, just do that, just do this. And for them, an African child is told you don't speak back to your elders. Yeah. So they're just doing what they're told to do and then going home maybe nelo frechingwa or 3 potatoes, when actually an adult should be working that, and when an adult works that, they're paid $150. Okay. And I'm just giving really abstract examples, but the point is that because they are children and they are not supposed to be working in the first place, they're very underdeveloped to be able to negotiate for a sustainable lifestyle that even encourages the conditions that they're having to work under. So really it does come down to almost borderline slavery when it now involves children. Child labor should not be allowed, full stop. We should not be having situations where we have young children coming from school, going to work in whatever farm, whatever mine, whatever what, it should not be happening at all. Yes, our situation is not ideal. The economy around some of our families and institutions does not allow for that, but it really should not be a thing that is allowed to move on.
Child labor should be eradicated.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, of course, don't let us know your thoughts on this and all the things that we have been discussing this morning. The feedback platforms are the Zim Papers TV Network Facebook page, at ZTN Prime on Twitter, and at ZTN Prime on Instagram. Now,